speak on any item on the standing committee agenda may do so when that item is up for discussion. You'll have 5 minutes with which to make your comments. Please come forward to the podium at the time that you are recognized, and you'll be able to make your comments. And for accurate recording purposes, we do ask that everyone please speak either directly or very close to a microphone, since we are both recording and broadcasting. And I do want to make sure that everyone is aware that we do have two additional, we have one blue sheet and one pink sheet for tonight's agenda. There was an item number 4 added to the committee agenda, and that is, there we go, item number 4 added to the committee agenda, and then there is item number 2 has been added to our outcomes agenda, and we want to make sure that we do cover those in due time. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alvey.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Murguia.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
Here. Thank you so much. Our first item of business is on our committee agenda. Item number 1 is our quarterly investment report. Mr. Lou Levin.
Commissioners, again, this is just our quarterly investment report through December 31st, 2013. No actions required. It's for information only. I'll just highlight a few numbers in the report. You can see our total investments as of December 31st, 200 million, slightly over. That included about 60 million that was subsequently distributed in tax distributions to other entities in mid-January. Our average yield, or our earnings on those investments, or outstanding investments rather, 0.54%, and our total earnings for the year, 751,000. What I thought might be interesting was I went back and looked at the same report for December 2008, and just to describe maybe the contrast of what we were earning in terms of interest simply 5 years ago, and that was at the time of the outset of the recession. In 2008, our total investments for the same period, we had 220 million, so we had a stronger, I'll say, cash balance at the time. Our average yield was just under 3%, and our interest earnings for the year 2008 was $7.5 million. So just to contrast that, in last year we earned $6.8 million less than we earned 5 years ago, and that really translates into this has been a major impact, in addition to property tax and other impacts we've had since the recession. I would rate this as one of the top 3 impacts that has, I'll say, negatively affected our cash reserves and our fund balance, and put pressure on our property taxes, our inability to earn significant interest monies. On the converse, with our ability to borrow funds on a long-term basis, is we're able to borrow at a lower rate than we were in 2008. But in the short term, it's a significant impact upon our budget. I'll entertain any questions.
My only question would be, how do we get that back up to 3%? But that's not something we'll solve here tonight. Thank you very much. Item number 2 on our agenda tonight is a resolution for a memorandum of understanding and a grant for growing from the ground up, and that's Misty Brown from Legal Department.
Good evening, Commissioners. You have before you a resolution. The Unified Government was awarded a grant for $25,000 with the possibility of an additional $5,000, totaling $30,000 from the Cities of Services. The resolution you have before you authorizes Unified Government to accept the grant and enter into a contract with Cities of Services. Jason Banks from the Mayor's Office and Steve Curtis from CHWC are here to talk more about the program and what the grant intends to do.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jason Banks with Mayor Holland's office.
As this group is certainly keenly aware, Mayor Holland is committed to addressing a number of health disparities in our community. Over the years, there have been a number of studies, and without citing them individually, most of the correlates in those studies point back to the lack of healthy foods, fresh foods, vegetables in the diets of our children in our community. And so this is a pretty unique opportunity, we think, to one, engage our community in a real organic way, and also to move the needle on some of those health indicators. And what I have up on the slide for you are the lots that have gone through the land bank transfer that will be the site for these community gardens. And so the memorandum outlines many of the key indicators, and I won't read this to you, but I would like to turn the presentation over to Steve Curtis to talk about some of the logistics of our grant.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Curtis. I'm a community organizer with CHWC. And getting this grant provides an opportunity to do several things. And as a community organizer, those of you that have been in the business before know that you have to look at every opportunity to interface with somebody in the community in a multifaceted way. You know, there's so many opportunities that exist out there. And this was to set up an urban farm. It's located about 50 feet east of M.E. Pearson Grade School, elementary school. 96% of the kids that go to that school qualify for a free lunch. About 39% of the people that live in the area live at the poverty line or below. We worked with some KU architectural students this fall rather, and they surveyed a lot of the population in the immediate area, and one of the things that they commented most about was not having fresh fruits and vegetables available to them. We chose this lot primarily for two reasons. One is to produce produce, but one of the other opportunities we saw was a chance to create a learning center where we could be a resource for people in the neighborhood, not only to get produce, but also to learn how to do it themselves. And we partnered with the K-State Extension Group. We've talked to Cultivate KC and Community Gardens to work with them, communities and schools at the school to work with the kids. And we hope to start working on this sometime in the next 2 weeks. We've still got about 1 foot to 16 inches of frost line in the ground, so there's no sense wasting a lot of time. The other thing before I move on is that you see several other opportunities here. You can see the trash along the alleyway. You can see the graffiti and the abatement treatment along the walls. I think we can make an impact on the kids in the area and on this alley as well by schools, so that when these kids walk to school, they don't have to see something as depressing as this. We'll put murals on the walls, work with the kids there, and we'll set up the garden so that we'll produce at least 500 pounds of produce this first year to give away to neighborhood residents. The program is focused on using volunteers. So we'll be using young people from the school itself will come over and visit and help us do some planning. We'll be using volunteers out of the community, particularly in the blocks that surround that area. Most of the blocks have about 20 houses, and each house has about 2.5 residents in it. According to the census, that may be off a little bit now. But that's generally the idea of what we want to do.
I would like to note that as Steve mentioned the impact volunteering component of this, I would like to extend an invitation to this governing body to come out and as soon as we thaw out, help us turn the soil. So don't feel pressured to respond now, but that's an open invitation. All right. Any questions?
How will the produce that comes as a result of this be made available to the public?
Do you have detail on that?
What we're thinking about doing is making that available on Saturdays, informing the neighborhood through flyering, doing flyers in the neighborhood itself, concentrating a lot on the volunteers that work there. I think they're the ones that probably should receive some produce first, but it will be set to give away. The other component of that, things don't always work out the way you want, so if they don't show up to pick up produce, we'll go door to door and try to give it away.
Any other questions, any other discussion? The request for action does ask that we approve this and forward it to full commission for approval, so I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
So there's a motion to approve this resolution and move it forward to full commission.
Second.
There is a second. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call, Alvin.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Lydia.
Aye.
Talman.
Aye.
McCure.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to turning the soil with you.
I'll be calling.
Yes, you will. Item number 3 on our agenda tonight is a resolution authorizing an intergovernmental cooperative agreement for tax verification. And presenting this is Brett Deichler.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good.
We are actually coming today to discuss this initiative for tax clearance. We are working basically with the Core 4 initiative, and I'm going to give you just a brief background in Core 4, how the 4 agencies that are actually involved in this are looking for ideas to try to basically create efficient measures and to innovate better business practices amongst the jurisdictions. So with the executive management being, from Doug on down and Dennis, working with the guys in KCMO, Jackson County, Johnson County, and also the city of Kansas City, Missouri, have collectively come together to try to put that together. So for the last 18 months, we've been charged with trying to find ways inside of our institution to basically take advantage of these communications, and this is an example of what that will be. Tonight, I'm going to let Misty talk a little bit about the resolution itself. That's basically our request, is to move this initiative forward by getting a resolution to full commission, trying to adopt that, and which will basically allow us to move forward in this progressive nature for this actual clearance. So the general program itself, like I said, is the 4 jurisdictions trying to work together. We're going to talk a little bit about the intent of what we're trying to do here tonight as well, with the initial focus of what we're actually doing as well on occupational licensing and delinquent real estate. Now, the other agencies themselves are, Johnson County is looking basically for personal property and delinquent real estate, whereas the city of Kansas, Missouri is going to be looking at earnings tax as their initial adoption over there for their protocol. And Jackson County is basically doing the same thing with personal property and DRE as well. So we are going to start here tonight by talking a little bit about the collaboration. I think my experience with Core 4 has been good so far. There's a lot of great initiatives coming out of this thing, and I think when Gordon called, we started talking a little bit with Kansas City, Missouri, in particular Mike Schumacher, which allowed us to basically get this initiative together, which when you look down at program intent will basically allow the 4 jurisdictions to set a threshold for any of their types of contracts. And as an example for the unified government, when we would receive a call, basically, or an email, a communication. We're going to start this thing light, too. That's the important thing. I'm a technology guy. I'd like to think that someday in the future we could have this all integrated, and that's one of the things that we're definitely looking down the road to, but we want to start simple. And I think it's very important to get the communication protocol built first. And once we do that, I think that this thing will be seated, well enough that we can get some communications behind it and build a little bit of technology to make it a little easier, too. But at the onset, emails, a tax verification letter from the other agencies as an example, would allow us to basically view if there's taxes owed, say, in our jurisdiction. If Kansas City, Missouri was to receive a contract request, they could actually contact us. We will look into our files to see if that vendor has any taxes due in our jurisdiction, as well as the other 2 remaining jurisdictions would reply back to KCMO, and then vice versa for us. We're going to be looking at, like I said, our initial focus is going to take and show construction contracts and awards of $50,000 plus, and then your general formal bid threshold for commodities of $20,000 is where we would start asking the other jurisdictions to respond back to us with some type of letter of clearance showing that the vendor would not owe any taxes in those other jurisdictions. So the communication requirements, once again, are going to be real simple at the front end, not to convolute the process, but to allow us to establish a protocol that's going to drive additional revenue in here. So I think that's real simple. We basically have 5 days to comply with the request. We'll search, like I said, our database would be Maui for occupational tax, and then it'll be the tax administration system for anything that deals with delinquent real estate. So with that being stated, I'm going to let Missy talk a little bit about the resolution, and we'll open it up for questions.
Commissioners, the resolution is pretty straightforward. Because this is an agreement involving 3 other jurisdictions, we need commission action that would allow us to enter into this agreement and also support the initiative. So the resolution just simply says, please let us do it, and do you support this initiative?
Questions?
Have other localities across the country tried the same approach, and what have been the results?
I don't believe there's been anyone that's actually tried this yet. That's not to say we didn't, uncover it, but I haven't seen anything. Mike Schumacher and I kind of did a little bit of research on the front end of this thing. We communicated pretty extensively for 4 or 5 months on this thing, and there wasn't anything out there like this yet. And everybody got real excited about it at the front end, and we started talking about how we could communicate this thing, and then we went back and said, let's get back and ground this into a real process and move it forward. They can learn how to communicate inside of that protocol. So, but I don't believe so, but it wouldn't surprise me if something's already out there.
Yeah, certainly if you're going to start a business in Wyandotte County, you have to get a tax clearance letter from the state of Kansas and provide that to the UG and as part of the application process. So it's interesting that you took that approach, that same tactic, and applied it to municipalities.
Exactly. It seems like a great plan, and I think we can add things to this as we go along once we establish the protocol. And that's why we've all kind of selected the jurisdiction and said, what do we want to look at? So, we're looking at things that interest us right now that we think there's, with occupational and delinquent real estate, those are 2 fairly large areas that there could be some significant revenue there, and we'll know a little bit more. We'll start to benchmark some things for you, report some things out on the backside and how this thing performs, and then try to move this program into overdrive, and then put some electronics behind it too and make it real simple.
One, I want to say I think this is a really good program. You guys really put your heads together to think of new ways to come up, to work together as jurisdictions. Probably if there's one concern I see when I looked at Jackson County is focusing on earnings tax, which is their way of reaching out to people throughout the metro area to make them pay taxes, where the rest of us are all focusing on property tax, which means if somebody's not paying their property taxes, we're hurting those people that live within our jurisdictions, and they're not going there from Jackson County. Is there a reason why they don't have the same focus?
Actually, Doug, I think it's Kansas City, Missouri, for the e-tax.
Was it key? Okay.
Yeah, and I talked to Mike about that, and that's basically legislatively, they have to do that. And I asked Mike a little bit in detail about looking for delinquent real estate and things like that, and they said this is where they wanted to focus initially because they were kind of required to do that under legislative law and to focus on that. They've got some things with the IRS and other things they comply with inside of that, so they've got a few more papers and things that they've had to adopt internally that we didn't necessarily have to look at because of that, but I think that's the only reason why.
Okay.
It is interesting, though. Commissioner.
I'm just curious as to how knowing, say, for instance, that a vendor in Missouri has outstanding taxes of some type, whether it's earnings tax, how knowing that information is going to help us. What do you see as the benefit to UG from knowing that information?
When we as an organization and as a Core 4 group start to assist in identifying delinquent taxes that are on the books somewhere, when we're asking someone to do that for us, they're looking out for our interests, whereas we're doing the same, obviously, when they ask if there's delinquent taxes in our jurisdiction. But at the end of that result, there will be a payment of some type that has to come through because there's language that's going to support the issuance of a contract, per se, that would say if you do not pay your taxes that are owed in Jackson County because you were under ABC Corp. Over there, we know who you are, and now you owe $50,000 there, then we have the right to basically refuse issuance of that contract. And that's where we're talking about how the resolution's kind of going to convey what we're going to try to do as far as the business protocol, but they're going to have to pay those dollars and show that those are paid over there. So in that case, Kansas City, Missouri would collect tax dollars that they wouldn't necessarily get. And then if the other, just to reverse that process, when we're actually identifying taxes, then we'd collect those taxes too before KCMO would actually commence with their agreement. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out how we are going to benefit, and I guess it just depends on where the vendor is and what you're looking for. Maybe the other jurisdiction benefits in some way one time and we do it another. Do you foresee this taking a tremendous amount of time of our our staff to make these inquiries and to do these checks, though?
At the onset, I don't think there's a lot of staff time required. We've tried to work out some of the business alignment with other staff members here and to try to get the communications, keep them simple. I think that's the main thing at the front end of this. And I think as this program grows, Commissioner, you're going to probably have someone dedicated to this program that's going to work it full time, because if we can get enough interest in the program, set the actual process up to where it's beneficial and look at the cost allocations and compare it to the actual revenues generated, I think we can actually show that this thing's going to pay for itself and then some. But the program's going to have to grow a little bit, and I think at the onset where we're establishing these first two initial protocols, I don't think there's going to be an exorbitant amount of staff time required for this. It's going to require us to lose any real manpower that would cost us additional funds during the year. But I'm anticipating this program growing and getting some teeth and getting a few more things in there, and then maybe 1, 3, 5 from now, we're looking at something that's much bigger, but it's a full-blown program, and it's actually dynamically built in a business process, and it's also electronically built, so it's a whole lot cleaner at the front end, which will allow us to expedite our service at this side, too.
Thank you.
Move for approval of the resolution as published.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve the resolution as published. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call, Alvin.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Garcia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McCarron.
Aye. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Item number 4 on our agenda tonight is actually the blue sheet item, and it is a resolution for the sale of UG-owned property, and George Brakovich will lead the discussion of this item.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good evening. George Brakovich with Economic Development. We're here tonight for you to consider a contract purchase agreement for property that we commonly refer to as Site C. It's about a 10.5 acre tract of property that is under UG ownership, part of the Village West development area. Site C, although it is 10.5 acres, has some challenges. Topography is fairly rough. Between two transition points, there's about a 40-foot change in elevation from high to low spot. It's been a challenge in marketing that site in the past, although we've had projects that we've considered there. I was talking with Mr. Crandall a while ago. Some high-profile projects like NASCAR Hall of Fame that didn't end up occurring there. We think it's a premier office site. So recently, the Kansas Department of Commerce had issued a project overview for a new office project looking in the Western Wyandotte corridor. We did an evaluation of our site. We felt that because of some of the limitations or restrictions the site had, it wouldn't be a strong contender as a standalone site. And that's where Mr. Crandall approached us and said that they had interest from the Speedway on a site that the Speedway was also looking to partner up for this very specific use. Again, I think we put some of the highlights of what the project overview from the state, up to 100,000 square foot user, 300 plus new jobs, 90,000 plus average salaries year one. Again, the site itself is 10.5 acres. One of the provisions we put in the contract before you is should the user not be inclined to take the entire site, we wanted to charge a premium because we assumed that the leftover property would continue to be a difficult property to market and sell. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bill Crandall with CBC Real Estate Group, LLC. They're our proposed partner in this, and Bill probably has a few comments.
Good evening. My name is Bill Crandall. I'm Managing Principal with CBC Real Estate Group. Our offices are at 4706 Broadway, Suite 240 in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's a pleasure to be back in front of the unified government again. It's been quite a while. They're all new faces since the last time I was here, except Doug and George. But no, I'm excited about the opportunity, and we are looking for approval for an exclusive agreement for this one response, and the RFP isn't yet out on the street for the proposer as of yet, so we haven't lost any time, which is good in my world. We would have a similar relationship with the Kansas Speedway for the adjacent piece of property, and until we know the specific program of the user, we know generally the size of the requirement. but we don't know a lot more than that at this point. We don't know exactly how, until we know those things, we don't know exactly how we'll use the UG land versus the Speedway land. But I do think it's a great office site, as evidenced by the fact that Cerner has built 2 brand-new buildings there as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions or discussion?
Would you anticipate that this site, these offices, would be geared to some kind of support for Cerner?
My understanding of the requirement that's out on the street right now, it's independent of the Cerner facilities.
The RFA requests resolution, adopting the resolution, rather, authorizing the execution of the purchase agreement. I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion for approval?
Second.
There is a motion and a second to adopt the resolution authorizing the execution of the purchase agreement. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Audi.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Revere.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McCary.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now on, let's see, that ends up concluding the committee agenda, and now we're going to move to our outcomes agenda. There are 2 items on it. Item number 1, which was, oh, and by the way, I just want to make a comment to the people on the committee. This blue sheet process, unfortunately, may become more routine than we wanted to because we moved up the deadline for items by a week to give us more time to review the agendas ahead of time. There may be items that come like this that the economic development staff feel is important to move forward in a timely manner. So just be prepared. We may be getting periodic blue sheets as last-minute items come in. Absolutely. Mr. Bach.
Just in relation to that too, you noted that there is no minutes on this month's agenda. That's just a staffing issue that the clerk's office, that they couldn't get them onto that calendar, and that, so you're probably gonna be that month behind, you know, once we're in cycle, but you'll be going back and approving a cycle behind, because we're not gonna work overtime or such like that to get the minutes on the agenda unless you direct that that's necessary, but otherwise we can't turn them with the other meetings in that time frame.
So item number 1 on our outcomes agenda tonight is a presentation on workforce housing. And to give a little bit of a background, in our last couple of meetings, we've had some discussions about, call it what you will, affordable housing, workforce housing, low-income housing, and we have had some discussions about looking at and possibly revising the scoring scale that we use to score proposals that come forward to us to determine whether or not we would give a UG letter of support to that proposal. Effectively, with the timing of the state such as it is, there's really no time pressure for us to make those revisions right now because there won't be more proposals coming forward to us that I'm aware of because the state's deadline has already passed for the early part of 2014. That gives us then some time to just add some additional items for discussion and for consideration. And so in talking with staff, they thought it might be good for a representative from LISC, and I see Stephen Samuels is here tonight, good to have you here, to give us a little bit of a presentation from the LISC perspective on how low-income housing or affordable housing or workforce housing works as one part of a larger overall strategy to build mixed-income neighborhoods that are attractive to retail. So anyway, thank you for being here tonight. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I'm Stephen Samuels, Executive Director with Greater Kansas City LISC, and I'm joined by our Senior Lending Officer, Chris Bukas, who some of you may already know. I'm going to watch the time because I could just babble on and on about low-income housing tax credits, and I don't want to. I'll introduce this by just saying that LISC, we're the largest community development corporation in the country, been around for over 30 years, and I'm not here as a neutral opinion on Lightech. I mean, we lobby at the federal, state, local level. These tax credits, if it wasn't for them, millions, and I'll show you, of housing would not be done in the country. and people would be struggling to find homes that they could afford. So it is one of those tools that, if not for, the bottom line is they wouldn't get done. Lightech makes development occur where the private market won't come. So we're big advocates for it. But I think that there's many different ways to perceive Lightech and perceive it as a tool, and I think that's maybe a place where we could all benefit from looking at it from different angles and seeing how it can best help KCK. That's my presentation. How'd you do this? Let's see. So as a development tool, we view it as being beneficial in terms of it provides affordable workforce and senior housing where the private market won't come. Across the country, the large old public housing projects, Lightech has done a terrific job replacing those with much more contemporary, mixed-use, mixed-income projects. Because it's a federally regulated program, every Lightech property has to be managed and has a high level of oversight, which makes them oftentimes a better run property than properties that are just left up to any independent landowner. As I mentioned, it attracts equity capital. There are many examples, and I'm going to leave you with a great piece of easy read research, but where Lightech, as well as new markets and historic, but are being used for transit-oriented development types of projects and being catalysts for that. And lastly, you can find many examples across the country, including right here in KCMO and KCK, where really they're the first phase of multiple phases of development that are much more market rate driven, that do have retail and commercial uses involved, and they're just the centerpiece. I don't know how much you know about Lightech from an academic standpoint, so I'm just going to paraphrase, and we can always return. But as I mentioned, it has generated over 2.5 million units in the country since it started. It is a program that gives developers income tax credits for 10 years in exchange for keeping properties at a certain income level for 30 years. You can go to the next slide. There's two types of Lightech products, the 4% and the 9%. It's the 9% that we read about. Very often it is the most competitive product out there. And there's a lot of work happening right now about how to make 4% more attractive, because as you see, the 4% really leaves the developer with still a gap to fill, where the 9% oftentimes does not. This is just kind of how it's administered from the national level down the local level, where the federal government issues the credits based on population levels. And then, as you know, it's really up to cities like you guys to support and endorse the projects for the state level. Give you an idea of scale for the state. Since '86 through 2010, you can see here the volume that low-income housing tax credits have generated. And of course, a lot of studies have been done in terms of the direct and indirect economic benefits. Is it arguable? Yes, it's arguable. There's many approaches to determining the economic spin-off effects. But this is one touted piece of research here where Lightech has generated over $213 million in state and local for their coffers, and over $100 million in housing credits in total. We took a snapshot of 1 year, and I think it's actually the next two slides that get really interesting. But for Kansas, the state, this is the volume that was produced here. The jobs, by the way, are jobs attributed to those projects, so that's construction and pre-development, design, etc. So that was the state. So we've been given all of like 4 days to put this together, by the way. So we did want to drill this down a little bit deeper with the research that we could find, and we used our New York office quite a bit for this. So in the 4 congressional districts, again, looking at it from 1986, you can start to see where District 3 falls in terms of a comparison. And it's the second largest district in terms of receiving those Lightech credits, which also makes it, of course, one of the districts, the biggest districts to receive those economic benefits. This is what I found particularly interesting, and I think worth examination over the long term, which is if you just took that 2010 snapshot, I'm new to the area, but to me this says there's been a big contraction here in District 3, because it went from being the second largest receiver to, in 2010, the smallest. And I'd have to do more research to see, why that is and how that compares to other snapshots of years. But it seems like it just hasn't been a place that's been cultivating this kind of development. With the help of our New York office, we actually mapped all of the Lightech since '86 for you, so you could see the distribution. Sometimes people think that these tax credits are all about congregating poverty, when in actuality, as you can see when you start to map it out, it's really about deconcentrating affordable housing units. The pink, because the legend's a little hard to read, the pink are all projects done pre-2000, the blacks and grays are post-2000. The bottom layer, I'm going to pull it up here so I can see it better. The bottom layer is actually household income and how it's dispersed across the area. So if you look, I don't have a pointer, but you know where KCK is. The average household income there is between $11,000 and $35,000. So many would say that's a great market for Lightech. You're building for the people who live there. And it's well distributed. I'll give you a comparison, which is kind of a very interesting one, but not on my computer, sorry. This is KCMO across the river. So you can see how they are really leveraging these tax credits to do a much higher degree of development. You want to go back one more time? I just think it's a big contrast. And to me, again, as a community development person, as an urban planner, I see a downtown in KCMO that's, has a high level of development activity, and they're obviously, it's being reflected as well by their use of Lightech. Although many Lightech projects will use all 100% of their units for the 60% AMI requirement, it's certainly not a requirement. I think that there's definitely flexibility there. These are the minimums for eligibility. So you can speak with the developer and if you can figure out a way to close the gap with other creative tools, there's no reason why a project has to be 100% at a 60% or 50%. So again, looking at it specifically for your jurisdiction, 60% of your AMI, which is the requirement to receive Lightech, puts rent limits on units. And here in Kansas, that limit would place a one-bedroom, the high limit at $787, a two-bedroom at $945, a three-bedroom at $1091. So again, I asked when I did this research, I said to the team, so what does that mean? I mean, what are rents in KCK? We quickly did an average rent scenario for KC Metro, which I know is a little different than KCK specifically, but a one-bedroom apartment average rent in 2014 is $719. So the 60% requirement at $787 isn't even at market rate. Again, I'd have to do more research, but there's a very good chance that you could put a Lightech unit up for rent that had to be eligible, could charge $77, but your market doesn't even support that. So again, the distinction between whether this is about affordable housing or workforce housing or market housing, there's no distinction unless, until the market starts to really pick up, and then you're forced to say, okay, well, we have to lower our rents. But that's probably not the case here. These are your income limits when you're dealing with Lightech. So a person cannot apply to live there unless they meet these guidelines. For a one-person household size, the maximum that they can be bringing in household income is $29,400. We often say that the average household size is a three-person household, so that would be $37,800. The median family income for the area is based on a four-person household of $69,900, and that's how you end up with $41,900 at the 60%. And so again, we ask ourselves, okay, well, who is that person? And so we, again, wanted to look at the statistics here in KCK. And based on U.S. Census information, the total population here is 157,000. About just under 50% of those individuals are employed. If you looked and you broke those down into what those people are making, you would discover that your largest group is averaging between $1,200 and $3,300 per month, which is about $27,500 a year. So the market is here for Lightech type of units. This is what these people can afford to pay, and if you're building for your population, then this is a great tool. I understand as well that you want to build for new people, and the decision then becomes, do you do nothing in the meantime, or do you also, want to replace the aging housing that you have and make sure people have new, well-managed homes? We just, again, went to the Department of Labor just to find out what kind of people make these kinds of incomes. Are these great citizens and residents? I would say yes. I would say this is your workforce. This is why, in my opinion, low-income housing tax credits should be called workforce housing tax credits, because these are hardworking people. These are blue collar. I hate these terminology, but you could, this is the working poor, if that's something you want to call it. It's the service industry, your security guards, your technicians. That's who's eligible to live in Lightech properties.
And Stephen, I will say one interesting thing that stuck out at me when I was doing this research is on the retail front. While those are entry level, so that's, you just got a job. Typically, that's minimum wage, and that goes into the average median, which is more around $25,000 to $30,000, once you start moving up in management. But if you look at your retail population, that's 14,000 people that live in Wyandotte County that work in retail. That's a huge population that can take advantage of this. A lot of those folks will be on TOD lines because, quite frankly, they may not be able to afford gas for their car to drive out to Western Wyandotte to work, because we all know where the centers are. So that stuck out as a big one. And the other one is in the food industry. There's a large population of food industry employees that work in that live in Wyandotte County and also could take advantage of this kind of housing.
The last piece that I was made aware of and that I noticed when I first got to town and met with the mayor and met with some of you is the investment that you've made in your transit hub and the rapid bus system. And again, to me, when you're investing in transit, when you're investing in bus ridership, then there's a certain market that you're really trying to take care of, and that's this market. So we just, we're grabbing some of the statistics because it all just kind of fits together. And that piece of research I'm going to share with you is about transit-oriented development and the kind of gap financing that often has to come into place when you want to cultivate a market. And that's really what I think is happening here in KCK. You're trying to cultivate a new market. We grabbed a few case studies for inspiration. There are a range of things. There's a project in Denver, Colorado called MileHigh Vista, using Lightech for 70 units. It is also on a highly utilized bus corridor, just like yours. And as you can see from the picture, it's the residential part of that diagram. And then it is the building block for a library and a commercial. And that's how they're getting this whole development along the block started, using Lightech. There's a project in Racine, Wisconsin that we thought had some relevance. 18 units, it's a mixed income. So 18 units have no income restrictions, 28 are at the 60%. It generated 95 jobs, and I put some quotes in here, just that they're using it as a catalyst for economic development and to spur development in their downtown core. Again, without it, nothing would be happening, not nearly at the pace.
And just to highlight, when you look at this particular development, you don't know that's a affordable housing project. So if they're done right and they're designed, with a city in mind and what a city wants, there's no way you can tell whether it's a workforce housing project or not. What people see is there's development happening. And that new development is tough to come by in a lot of areas. And so you can use this tool to build new construction in areas that have had disinvestment.
Example from across the river, thought that was important for you all to see, that there's some great projects, that happen in KC-Mo, again, that you wouldn't know the difference whether it was a Lightech property or not. I think there's only one or two others, Chris. Yeah, there's another one across the river, the Graphic Art Lofts. One in Dickinson, I forget why I pulled this one. Oh, I know, it was because there's a real focus on the workforce, and they were really building it for the people that were servicing the area. And this project being a catalyst for neighborhood revitalization, probably finishes it. This has examples, I could send you hundreds more. So in closing, we were asked to come here to try to provide you just yet another perspective on this great tool that LISC really believes in. We certainly hear from developers and community development corporations in KCK looking for our support. KCK, as you know, is one of our neighborhoods now, so we've been investing in this community, and we want to support the developers that are going after, Lightech. I mean, if the project makes sense, but I want to do it knowing that you also support it. I certainly don't want to support someone and have them come here and, so I feel like there's room here to kind of come together perhaps on some vision. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have some time if there's any discussion, any questions.
When you point out that sometimes the Lightech housing creates additional opportunities for other mixed use or mixed income development, is it usually done as a larger project at the beginning, or do those projects, the low-income housing, then attract the interest of investors after the fact? So, in other words, do you simply try to strategize and find developers at all levels of the income to get the development going in a particular area?
I've seen it happen and read about it, always.
Yeah.
So sometimes a Lightech property will build retail and commercial into their first floor, and you have a mixed-use project. Sometimes they partner, and they're the first of 2 or 3 phase development. Sometimes they're just doing their project, but because of the public sector really working and incentivizing in other ways the other private developers to support it, suddenly you've got more of a master planned concept.
And so part of our discussion has been that that there's been a concern that perhaps the low-income housing has been concentrated in neighborhoods east of 635. But if it's really about workforce, providing workforce housing, why are developers perhaps not looking to the 435 corridor in Wyandotte County to put together a Lightech development for workers who will be out west?
You know this geography better than I do. I don't know where the 435 is.
I mean, if the jobs are out west of the Legends, many of them are, right, then it would seem to me that Lightech would be looking to put some developments out there, and it would be an easy, you could do the TOD, you could do, it's the jobs are out there. It would be a less problem for transportation. So it would pull some of that interest from perhaps east of 635 out to the western part of the county. Any ideas?
I mean, a lot of times it's about density. If there's less density out west when they do their calculations, it's about population. Mm-hmm. It's about who's going to be the user of that. If they're out west, a lot of folks don't have cars and take the bus. So if they're out west, if you're living out west, you have a car, because you have to drive somewhere for the most part.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's one particular, probably concern. And they like to put a lot of affordable housing projects are more in concentrated areas like an urban core. Just because, again, as we've seen, that's the market that's here. That's who want to, be able to afford $600 to live in along a corridor, like downtown KCK.
And is another reason why the real estate prices would be cheaper east of 635, and so it's easier to develop?
So that's a good question, because acquisition costs are not an allowable cost for low-income housing tax credits. And so the more expensive it is to acquire the land, the less subsidy you get for the development. So it just adds extra development costs. So when you start to pencil it out, it could be that, depending on the unit size, and, if you get up to like 70, 80, 90, 100 units, then you get some economies of scale, but a lot of communities don't want 100 units, because we talk about concentration of it. You want smaller, you want some mixed income folks in those buildings. So acquisition costs are a big issue when it comes to, evaluating your financial pro forma.
Okay. And then finally, that you had noted that there are far fewer of these projects happening in KCK as opposed to, let's say, to Kansas City, Missouri. Is that because Kansas City, Missouri perhaps is more aggressive in trying to seek these folks out, and do they have a larger toolbox to provide other incentives to leverage these projects?
Yeah, I guess Kansas City, Missouri provides home and CDBG for multifamily residential.
Oh, okay.
And so they use that as a tool to increase their stock. They have an aging infrastructure. And again, this is a tool to help support income in low-income areas. And so they have used different financial tools, but in historics as well, we've seen. So on 4% deals, you have to use a historic to actually get to a deal to pencil out. And so and also sprinkle in some home funds and some CDBG, because there's not a lot of 9% credits that are out there. And so that's part of the issue. But they are aggressive. They're very supportive of low-income housing tax credit work, workforce housing, and it has done some great things with the Bancroft School. And that whole area is starting to revitalize now. I think they have 100 units around Bancroft now in a neighborhood, and they're beautiful units. And we're going to hopefully start to see a ripple effect with property values and people fixing up their homes. Because, when they start to redevelop that area, that we're already seeing people starting to paint their houses, starting to keep their lawns a little bit nicer, because that area is starting to transform.
And I would just add that I think you need capacity and cooperation to do these deals. Projects, workforce housing, Lightech deals, it's blood, sweat, and tear kind of stuff. It's, one of the reasons why it doesn't just happen like in certain areas is because a typical developer doesn't want to deal with it. A typical developer wants to be developing in green fields and build A-frame houses, know he's in and out in 16 months. That's the name of the game for the majority of players. A lot of these deals are community development corporations, or they're very dedicated developers who are in that, really have learned how to work with the target market and learn how to work with their political jurisdiction, because it's competitive and it's hard.
And so I'm assuming that there are a limited number of developers who actually do Lightech. That'd be, not just anybody jumps into it. You have to have some.
Anyone can, but yes, you would typically become someone who's become adept
Right.
at it.
And
The approval process is complicated. Creating the applications is complicated. So there are some folks like Yarko, Gary Hassenflue, Dalmark. There's some groups that specialize in it. McCormick Baron Salazar has done some great work near 18th and Vine. All 99, those are 99% leased up. The other fact that I didn't have in the presentation I want to throw out is the foreclosure rate on these projects is 0.61% today. So very, very few of them are ever foreclosed upon. So that was something that I stumbled through in my research, and I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing that in 2013 that less than 1% have been foreclosed on. So they're also safe.
So because you have to develop be adept at this kind of project, and you're looking at different jurisdictions, you will tend to focus your efforts and your opportunities in areas that you have developed the most capacity. And that's why you would tend to see more perhaps in KCMO than you would in KCK?
Yeah, I would say, I think if I understood the question right, there's not a lot of probably capacity here, yet not a lot of experience yet maybe on how to really leverage these tools. And you would probably have your 3 or 4 developers that you like to work with, who you believe in, who do these kinds of projects, and I don't know if you have that.
And I think it takes support, it definitely takes support of the governing body to get these done. And in KCMO, they're supportive of those, and they do allocate, they have more resources because they have a larger population, right? So it's, that's one big, thing that they have. They have more resources, but they're also promoting it.
And from my understanding, they have a more robust public transportation, especially in the urban core.
A little thing called a streetcar.
So I have a little different take on Lightech.
Yes.
So, but we're all entitled to our own opinion.
Yes.
You made the comment that we have a market here in Kansas City, Kansas, that could specifically benefit from this kind of housing. But if they are in need of new housing, then if they live here, where do they live now?
So I can answer that. So it's also about attracting new people to Kansas City, Kansas. If you want to attract someone who works at KU Med, who, there's a million profiles of people who can utilize this. But let's say the wife and husband make $65,000, $70,000 a year. Well, if you have a baby, let's face it, you're not going to be sending your kid to daycare because you can't afford it. It's not worth working. So a mother or father would stay home, and then you'd have one single earner. They may make $35,000 a year at their job as a teacher or as whatever, or as someone that works in the medical profession, is I think the biggest example, because we have a hospital right over there that has how many people that make within this income range. So it's about marketing to new folks that want to live in KCK for an affordable price, who can live and work near, or I should say live near where they work, and also have some transit, but it's not all about transit. I mean, people have cars, obviously. But, it's about attracting more people with new construction, because oftentimes you can't attract somebody unless you have something new that they want to live in. So I would say that's kind of what the take is from what we see across the country is, once you have something new, someone wants to live there.
So,
But also, I would imagine, college students, moving on from their dorms and their roommates, and people growing up and leaving their homes, and people who want to have a new piece of property.
yeah, are you familiar with the trend with college students and what they're spending on dormitories right now?
No.
Yeah, I'm super familiar with that.
Okay.
So I would tell you that the average college student is paying almost luxury apartment rents for the apartments that they're living in. I'm talking about the average college student. They're financing their housing. That's the trend. Whether I agree with it personally or think it's a good idea is not in that equation. I'm just telling you that's the trend, and universities around the country are building very high-end apartments to accommodate their students. But all that set aside, you were talking about you want to attract new people. We have a lot of affordable housing in Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County right now. Or if we didn't, our median income wouldn't be as low as it is. So we have a number of people that we're already housing here. My understanding from the last 7 years of serving on the commission is to develop a mixed income neighborhood. A mixed income neighborhood where you have low, middle, and high income people living together. And that can be challenging, but it can also work if you take it one step at a time. I am concerned about low-income housing tax credit projects adding to the low-income housing stock that we already have an abundance of, and not being able to have an impact on our median income. Because what's very clear is that when commercial developers look at areas to develop commercial properties, they look at median income and disposable income. And we don't have that right now. And I think we're very different from Kansas City, Missouri. We don't have near the density that they have. And you do have nice apartments around the Quality Hill area where the Lightech came in after those apartments were already in place. So there's a difference. When you have a city that has pockets of wealth that are in favor of bringing lower income housing to that area, then I can see it working fine. But I think what Mr. Alvey was saying is that the one geographic area of Kansas City, Kansas of wealth seems to be in western Wyandotte County, and we haven't been successful in locating low-income housing properties out there. I'm not saying we should do that, just for public record. I don't know anybody that lives out there. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm simply saying that continuing to stack poor people on top of poor people east of 635 is not the answer either. And I will tell you that we just got a presentation from North Point a month ago, who developed luxury, it's a category, luxury apartments out in the Village West area. And they told us who their primary market was or who their renters were. And they were coming all the way from KU Hospital and KU Medical Center down in my district in District 3. No subsidies, luxury rents. So my focus has been in my district, and I can't speak for the whole commission, on developing a mixed income neighborhood. And adding additional Lightech isn't, I think, gets me to that goal. Now, what I thought this discussion was going to be about wasn't going to be about how Lightech works. My concern when this came up is I asked it to come back on the agenda to discuss specifically on how we as commissioners could vote no on a project and have more flexibility with those Lightech projects that came in front of us and have it mean something. Because right now, in the way the criteria is, if a developer comes in front of us and they meet that criteria, we can't stop that Lightech development from happening. And I can tell you, it would be a major impediment to what I'm doing in my district in the way of attracting retail. We just approved a $9-point-whatever million Walmart deal on a Superfund site that people are struggling with all across the country. So I would tell you to whittle away and lower my median income any more than it already is, that would not be good for commercial development. So again, I'm looking for a mixed income neighborhood. I'm specifically, and this tool, I totally agree. I think it should be up to the commissioner and their district and whatever their vision or their plan is for the area that they represent. But personally, I'm looking for a way that I'm not locked into saying yes to a developer that meets sort of an obscure criteria that may not dovetail with the vision or the long-term plans I have for my district.
And to respond to that, we discussed, and last time after the last meeting, Mr. Brockman sent our current scoring scale and current criteria to all of us for our review. Since we didn't have time pressure to get that updated immediately because of the timing of the state allocations, and since we have new members on this committee who don't have as much background and don't understand where this tool fits in the broad scheme, we thought it would be good to get that background, to give some additional perspective. Now, what I'd ask is, having had this presentation, having the criteria and the scoring scale from Mr. Brockman, now we look at that, we come back, and we decide what changes, if any, we want to make to that particular scoring scale, which may address some of the concerns that you have. And because we had talked about a number of things, including geography and density and all of these things. So now it's our opportunity to look at our tool and find out how we want to modify our tool so that it meets our needs.
I thought the meeting was different than that. I thought for me specifically, I said, all I want to know is a way that I can vote no in my district when it doesn't fit the long-term plan that I have for my district. And what I was asking for specifically is for staff to come back with solutions to that specific problem. I mean, in fact, I wanted to make sure I was clear, so I reviewed the public taping of this on our YouTube site to make sure I was very clear. And if you review that meeting online, you'll see I was very clear about, I don't know what to tell staff to do to alter, how to alter our policy in a way that when I vote no, it counts, and that it's not all about just a criteria. That's what I care about. I mean, listen, I welcome to Kansas City. And I'm glad you're here, and I do think LIS does some really good projects. And I do hear what you're saying, and I do see how Lightech projects can be used in a way that you've talked about. They are few and far between. I run a not-for-profit. I'm super familiar with Lightech. I know what it's like to do redevelopment in a very challenging area with very little government assistance. So I would tell you, yes, in some situations these work. And I can't speak for Commissioner Townsend or Commissioner Walters in their particular areas and what they want. I don't want to get in the way of what their goals are. I just know that District 3 is moving forward rapidly. Our median income in 10 years has risen by over $10,000. It is significant. To get commercial to take a harder look at me, I need to get my median income to $50,000 a year. I'm almost there. I'm going to continue to work towards that so that retail and housing developers will look at my district without a nonprofit intermediary. I don't want to be in the middle of that anymore. So that's my goal, and specifically without starting all over from scratch, I just want to know what needs to happen so that commissioners can have a voice on Lightech in their district. And I would ask staff to bring that forward, because I am definitely not qualified to figure out that kind of policy.
So be it.
All right. I mean, I actually have a couple questions I'd like to ask them, but I can respond to that as well. But I think Commissioner Townsend has a comment.
Well, thank you. I think it would still be beneficial for us as a committee to have the discussion. My recollection of previous discussions when this topic came up about how the commissioners could have a voice and a meaningful vote, because my recollection was if certain criteria are met, then we see it, but there's no action that we can take. So I understand you want to have a voice and a vote that can make a difference. So my recollection was that if we have this discussion, we may come up with certain points that will make a difference in identifying criteria that we can add. Not that I'm an expert in it either, but that was part of my recollection of how this could happen, and of course with the expertise of staff, but I think that would still get to what your point is. I still think we need to have that discussion.
I just know, and I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
Commissioner Townsend. I would just tell you, that's a giant undertaking. I mean, I'll just tell you, that's my experience, because this is Lightech is very controversial. And really, it really does depend on what perspective you're looking at it from. Development is a tricky thing, and you have to be very flexible. And you have to be able to work with lots of different parties to make things happen. And yeah, Lightech actually absolutely could be used as a tool. I would agree with them. I don't see that happen very often, but it could be used as a tool. And I'm willing to go through that exercise. I guess I'll say that. If you need to go through that, I'm willing to do that with you. But just know going into it, it's a long discussion. Just so you know.
We've been there before, so that won't be good. But I think just going through discussion, it would certainly be helpful for me and those who may be listening. And we don't have to start from scratch. I mean, we've got something obviously that's already there. So this would be an opportunity to say, what else might we want to add that would take into account the concern that you're raising? So, and go from there.
Appreciate you guys coming tonight. I guess we'll move into it, is there any measurable numbers to show that the people that have moved into that, are they existing residents, or like you say, are they someone that's moved into it? Can we, any data to show that one way or another?
I mean, we didn't get that data. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure there's been enough white papers and case studies and research done on this that you could find at least, like I said.
Yeah, I didn't figure you had it, so I didn't mean to put you on that point, but I just wondered whether that's something, and we could look for that too, if you guys could help us point us in the right direction. I think we could have some staff members try to work on it as well, because I think that goes a long ways toward looking at some of the questions that the governing body has, about that. The other question I have is, in areas in KCMO, do they have any kind of house-for-house type replacement projects where theirs goes, or is it wide open? Meaning that when they come in with a affordable housing project, do they take out something else for it to go in there? Or is it just whatever property they can get to put it in, that's where they'll go?
There's a requirement, I think it's a committee requirement to have an X number of affordable houses that they, I believe, manage or in production, but they don't take other ones out. Sometimes they'll replace, like if a particular project has passed its 15-year compliance period, they'll actually either renovate it or they could tear it down completely and build new, but they don't take them out of production if they build additional units. They look at this as a catalyst. They look at their population, they look at what people can afford, and the developers build these deals.
I just want to say one other thing too, that even if one is successful in growing a mixed income, vibrant place over the course of 10 or 20 years, you will at some point say to yourself, and in fact the more successful you'll be, the more you'll be forced to ask yourself this question: where are we going to build housing that's affordable? Because the more successful you are, the less affordable the housing becomes. Eventually, you'll come to the point where workforce housing, the entire term started, which is, I'm going way to the extreme here, but it started in like Aspen, Colorado, because everything was unaffordable, and the person who served you dinner at the restaurants had to live 30 miles away. So at some point, you always end up back at, now we have to build affordable housing, because eventually the housing, even if you think you have enough today,